According to Plato, one of the sources of wealth for the mythical city of Atlantis was a metal alloy called Orichalcum. In his dialogue Critias, Plato says, Orichalcum was dug out of the earth in many parts of the island, being more precious in those days than anything except gold. Now, if Atlantis was a real place, where did this orichalcum come from? Well, it was just there in the ground, you might say. But not so fast, because I have a thought on that. Let's look again at that question, and I'll break it down. Hi, I'm Greg, and welcome to What's Old is New again. Let's start with the question of why there typically isn't a lot of metal out here on the Earth's crust. When the Earth formed, it wasn't a solid, cohesive mass. So as things were beginning to coalesce, the heavier stuff, like metal, would naturally sink lower towards the center, and the lighter things, like water and carbon, would stay near the surface. Just like when you're panning for gold, the heavier metallic gold sinks to the bottom of the pan. That's the main reason Earth has a metal core, and there's not a lot of free metal just hanging around out towards the crust. So along with digging in mines, where is a place metal on the surface of the Earth could legitimately come from? The answer is meteorites. Meteors typically contain stony material, iron, or some blend of the two. Now, depending on where the meteor originated, why would the metal be limited to iron? Some meteorites contain nickel, so why couldn't others have copper, or tin, or whatever? Meteorites do contain these other metals, but typically in very small amounts. While there's little evidence of meteorites containing other metals, I don't see why it's outside the realm of possibility that they could, especially if the evidence was lost as these valuable metals were carted away and used by the ancient peoples. So keeping bolide impacts in mind, let's look at the reshot structure in Africa, sometimes called the Eye of the Sahara or the Eye of Africa. There are two plausible explanations for the formation of the reshot structure. The first is volcanic, the second an extraterrestrial impact. While the volcanic theory is most popular, I'm not sure I'm on board. It's the idea that the reshot is a volcano that failed and is best described by the Hudson Valley geologist at the link shown. I show it here in a series of stages in this diagram from the webpage. It suggests a series of magma uplifts but not eruptions, followed by resettling over the course of millennia. My biggest issue with this is the rings on the reshot are all concentric, which would mean the African plate did not move, and we all know from plate tectonics that continental plates do move. So I believe for this theory to be correct, the center of the rings would follow a track rather than be concentric. Now you might counter this by suggesting that all the uplifts happened within short succession, but that would imply a hot spot suddenly appearing and then going away, which is not the way things work. As an example of this, look at the Snake River Plain southwest of Yellowstone National Park, and you can see the path of the North Atlantic plate that it took as it moved over the stationary magma hotspot. Keep in mind, the plate moved in the direction opposite the arrow. It only appears the hotspot moved to the northeast. A comment on the Hudson Valley Geologist webpage is a perfect segue to the next theory of the reshot formation, the impact theory. An anonymous poster writes, "The locals told me this crater was created by the hoof of Muhammad's horse as he descended to Earth from his trip to the moon." Now, if that doesn't imply an impact, I don't know what does. So now let's look at how an impact could create a ringed system like this. Imagine a rock striking water in a pond as it is thrown in. As it hits the water, the surface of the water is depressed below its original plane, indicated by the dashed line. The same would be true with a meteor striking the Earth on a hard surface. The surface would be deflected down by the tremendous force of the impact. After the impactor passes through the water, or disintegrates against it, the deflected surface will rebound and can potentially go up above its original level in an overcorrection. The mass of this extension above the original plane will then sink back down, potentially below the original plane again. This up and down motion will continue for a few cycles before it stops. This is called an underdamped system. Now, the images we've just seen show a cross-section of the 3D image. Here is the full picture, exemplified by ripples in a pond, just as anyone has seen. But this is a pond. How about a ringed meteor impact? Let's look at a few examples. Here's the Orunga crater in Chad. I hope I pronounced that right, but you can clearly see the ringed structure. This is the Upheaval Dome crater in Utah. Again, the ringed structure is evident. Scientists originally theorized that this was a salt dome, but recent evidence leans quite strongly towards the impact theory. The ancient and massive Vredefort crater in South Africa. It has largely eroded away over the course of the last 2 billion years, but you can still see evidence of the rings. So why can't the reshot be an impact structure as well? Next, let's take a look at the reshot Atlantis theory, and then finally tie it into Orichalcum. If you've already heard of the theory that the reshot structure is Atlantis, you've most likely heard it from Jimmy Corsetti of the Bright Insight YouTube channel. He has done the best job by far of getting this theory out there and making it known to the public. Corsetti stated the inspiration for his videos on this came from the documentary Visiting Atlantis, published in 2011. I had a look at the website visitingatlantis.com, which Jimmy refers to, featuring George Alexandra and Natalis Rosen. Both the website and the video gave me the impression that they originated the idea. I reached out to them via their website contact info on the origin of their idea, but have not heard back. I also watched another great video called The Atlantis Puzzle, featuring Jack Kelly. This also talks about the idea of the reshot being ancient Atlantis. Jack spends lots of time reviewing the work of George Serentitis, who retranslated Plato's work and had his translations verified and spent countless hours of work, concluding that the reshot structure was Atlantis. One key breakthrough in Serentitis' work was the identification of a few key mistranslations in Plato's account. First, the word sunk was never used. The actual translation is covered by water. Think of New Orleans during Katrina. Second, there was no real agreement on the location of the Pillars of Hercules until hundreds of years later in Roman times, when it was located at the Straits of Gibraltar. Previously, it could have been several places. Third, the Greek word for ocean, okeanos, was never used. Instead, it was the Atlantic pelagos. Pelagos is one of 3 words the ancient Greeks used for sea. These words are very specific and distinct to different types of bodies of water. If Plato meant the Atlantic Ocean, he would have used the word okeanos. So whose idea was it originally? As I got no indication that one had stolen the other's work, they seem to have arrived at their work independently and gotten to the same conclusion. So going back to the quote at the beginning, Orichalcum was dug out of the earth in many parts of the island, being more precious in those days than anything except gold. Orichalcum was an alloy. It also wasn't made in a kiln. They dug it straight out of where they found it. What if the orichalcum they mined was the remnants of an impacting meteor that created Atlantis? I mean, that's the only place it's ever been found. It's never been made. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to believe that orichalcum could be the remains of a metallic meteorite. In 2015, ingots, pictured here, of what are suspected to be orichalcum were discovered on a sunken vessel off the coast of Sicily. They were analyzed and found to be an alloy consisting of 75 to 80% copper, 15 to 20% zinc, and traces of other metals. So that's my thought. A meteorite of Orichalcum struck northwestern Africa countless ages ago, creating the reshot structure and a series of ringed islands when northwestern Africa was an inland sea. Some people found it and decided it would be a kick-ass place for their capital and mine the Orichalcum they found there. Now let's do a bit of a sanity check. First and most importantly, none of what I'm proposing is science. It's total speculation, thought, an idea that occurred to me. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It could be possible, but that's the 1% inspiration. The 99% perspiration would need to follow. Is Atlantis even real? They thought Troy was a myth until they found it. How was the ringed city of Atlantis created? I think it was natural and not built. A failed volcano could in theory bring metal to the surface of the earth, but an impact makes far more sense to me. Unfortunately, modern science is very hesitant to call things impact sites and will call them anything else before that. A proper geological study of the reshot would need to be done to conduct a thorough search for impact proxies, or conversely, find some support for the magma uplift theory. Are there examples of other non-iron metallic meteors? I've always been curious about the amount of copper in Michigan, which just so happens to be near where the Carolina Bays and Nebraska rainwater basins point back to. Is all that nearly pure copper necessarily terrestrial in origin? Could traces of an alloy that could be orichalcum be found at the reshot, or anywhere that is speculated to be Atlantis? It doesn't have to be the reshot, it could be another location. So far, we only have a few ingots from a shipwreck. So a lot of work would need to be done, and for those who would default to, there is no evidence, have you looked for any? Maybe the evidence will pile up and point one way or the other. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm okay with that. But that would need to be proven and not just said.